All right, how's everyone doing tonight? Welcome to my channel. And this channel is for educational purposes. We take a look at great theories of everything, um, cosmologies, cosmogonies, all-encompassing theories, earth-shattering theories, tour de forces, and magnum opuses from obscure sources. And this, I believe, is our 27th day of reading from the book, It's After the End of the World. Don't you know that yet? From a history of black jazz musicians in Chicago in the 1950s and 60s who articulated a cosmology, a all-encompassing theory, all-encompassing approach to music. They redefined their own profession as professional jazz musicians to become more of a spiritual leader and healer. But right now we're in the appendix, which is autobiographical, and skipped a few pages, moving forward into an event that occurred. This is at the end of this section, which is talking about learning how to administer cannabis, and just got done with a description of an event going to a concert where the author is seemingly completely out of it, but then kind of rallies and is able to kind of autopilot himself into relatively normal behavior. Okay, we're going to leave it, start it right here. Before too long, though, I was able to literally pull myself together and go to the concert. I was not really able to hold my attention on the music, however. This episode was the object of merciless ribbing over the next weeks until another one of us lost control and did something stupid that superseded mine. My experience was far from stupid, though. Not like an alcohol blackout. I learned a lot of things that day, even if I couldn't express anything. The next year, perhaps in a subconscious attempt to understand the science of pot smoking, I bought a bag of my own, easily attainable usually, and a pipe, so that I could experience it on my own time and under my own etiquette. Reckoning the effect to be short-term, half an hour to an hour, I first decided to smoke before leaving home on my way to the library, a place I rarely went, to go study. It must have been exam week. I brought my Walkman headphones for you young people and took the 30-minute walk in order to chill out before I got ready to study, which even without the reefer was unrealistic. My roommates thought this was an interesting idea, to smoke alone and go out alone. As an only child, it was not so strange, and the walk, which was practically a daily thing, started out pleasantly enough. Before too long, however, my well-worn path was to be filled with mystery. Almost all at once, it seemed my world turned upside down. My path became totally alien, and I became totally disoriented. I kept heading down the road, but I did not know where, and I did not know why. My thoughts seemed to be disjointed, and so did my experience. I heard a beep of the horn. I saw the glare of the streetlight. I felt the temperature of the air. But the problem was that these things did not have any settled meaning. It was as if I was experiencing each for the first time. and it was just too much information. The sensations were all separate, but did not fit into a whole. It seemed, looking back, that my short-term memory storage had been paralyzed. Instead of these sense perceptions all fitting into the ebb and flow of a total experience that I perceived as part of a chain, each particular perception hit me like a cataclysm. All by itself, the impression would hit me in isolation, and, it seemed, I had to take each sense impression separately and come up with a decision about what to do. What was that? What should I do about it? Do I need to run away? Was that horn beep directed at me? Normally, I felt these impressions as background. But now each impression would hit me with a sense of urgency, as if the event were aimed directly at me and called for my immediate response. Obviously, this world of the mythological, where I was being tested by the gods, was quite overwhelming. Probably about every 30 seconds I was confronted with what I perceived to be a life or death situation. I found myself to be powerless to deal with these Promethean challenges, and I just kept walking. So while an observer would have perhaps not noticed anything too different about my walk to campus that night, an EKG would have detected a person in wild fluctuation, having to deal with the full emotion and directness of every easily perceivable event, and dealing largely in the world of conjecture and fantasy, trying to realize what each of these events meant to me, but having no real grasp of how these acts fit together with each other. The result was a tremendous amount of stress and a strong feeling of impotence. The world was in an uproar, and I was but an observer of the drama of continuous catharsis, a nervous breakdown in the vernacular. By the time I got to campus, I was pretty much wiped out and wanted the onslaught to stop. I needed a breather, so instead of going to the bright lights of the library, I decided, even though I was pretty disoriented, to go to the darker, louder, and more welcoming student union, where I might be able to better camouflage my state. Many people were drinking beer and loud music was playing. So I just grabbed a table in the dark area, opened up a book, and pretended to read it, even though my memory was not processing things long enough to even get to the end of a sentence. I could read the words, but not derive any meaning from them. So too, I could hear the music, but couldn't attend to it long enough for it to have any continuity. The emotions conveyed in the music sucked me in and brought out an emotional reaction from me, which would only last until the emotion of the music changed. Fortunately for me, I was able to elude the gaze of anyone who knew me, and over the next couple of hours, I was able slowly to put myself back together. Over the next 2 or 3 years, similar events recurred sometimes, but not all the time, that I smoked. I was actually starting to think that I had it under control until July 1991. By this time, I was much more experienced with cannabis and other psychedelics, but one day I found myself pushed to the limit again. This experience helped me immeasurably. No one can ever be completely prepared for a psychedelic trip, but experience really helps to control the panic and paranoia. 2 events about a year apart gave me an opportunity to demonstrate, at least to myself, an increased ability to use psychedelics without becoming hopelessly alienated. I wasn't at the point where I stopped experiencing any problems of fear or panic, but I made 2 breakthroughs that changed my very ideas on the subject. The first concerned my second experience with psilocybin mushrooms in May 1990. The second concerned my experience with a potent homegrown cannabis, tripweed, in July 1991. The first time I tried shrooms in 1989 was the result of the ringing endorsement of them given to me by one of my best friend's older brothers. At a party, he sat me down and explained the steps of a mushroom trip. I was interested, but mushrooms were quite hard to find. It was probably about 2 or 3 years before I got my first opportunity, which was basically unsuccessful, owing to us having a very small amount and to overusing hard alcohol at the same time. The mushrooms gave me a pleasurable but very limited effect. I found myself wading in the shallow end of a large lake near campus and playing with a stick in the water for what seemed like hours. But I was definitely not tripping. It was not until after my first year in law school at a different large Midwestern university that I had the opportunity to take enough mushrooms to trip. The law school semester ended or lasted a week longer than the college student semester, so when we finished our exams, it was as if we had the whole campus to ourselves. I took the mushrooms with 2 other male law students, one of whom had taken them before. He insisted that it was a good idea to get a lot of beer for the occasion, and we did. But we did take the mushrooms before the beer started to take any effect. They tasted terrible, but I got them down. Then after about 20 or 30 minutes, I began to feel very sick and very helpless. I curled up into the fetal position on my bed and began to sob like a baby. Somewhat like my extreme cannabis experiences, I felt the world closing in on me. Unlike the cannabis, however, it was physical as much as mental, and it was happening very quickly. The only thing I could really decide to do was to lie down in the fetal position. Even though I was crying, I don't recall being scared, but I knew that I was in big trouble, and there was not much I could do about it. So I just got down and tried to accept my demise. I must have been affected more quickly and more intensely than my friends. But I remember at least the experience one of them not being particularly alarmed or concerned about my behavior and condition. That was fine with me because I just wanted to be alone. He must have known that this was really only a period of acclimatization. Then, within 10 minutes, something clicked in and I broke through into a sublime psychedelic state. I was euphoric, alert, awestruck, and feeling no pain, and my friends were right there with me. We were tripping. Now, almost as an afterthought, because we felt it didn't really matter because everything was so perfect, we had to decide what we were going to do with our time. These were the easiest choices we ever made because everything we did was fresh, exhilarating, and fulfilling. We listened to music, danced, drank beer, threw the football around, threw anything around to try to catch it. But we talked. I was unusually not interested in trying to meet women. But whatever we did the best we could and found it easy to agree when to move on to the next activity and what that activity would be. Even though it was really only the 3 of us all night. I remember this night being one of the most wonderful and powerfully influential nights of my life. The mushrooms convinced me that life was worth living, even if it was only triggered by doing something secret and illegal. Indeed, toward the end of the night, we smoked a little pot in order to trigger the mushrooms for one last curtain call. I went to sleep about 5 a.m. after getting a few complaints for noise. We were a bit out of control, but I would get better at that in future trips. Totally exhausted, with my head swimming, I looked forward to the next opportunity with psychedelic mushrooms. I'm very sorry. I'm going to have to call it quits right now. There's a delivery at the door, and I have to go get it. Maybe I'll be back later to resume. Oh, no, actually, it is not. It's somebody cutting the grass, actually. I thought I heard a car. Okay, let's keep going. The trip caused me to see the world in a profoundly different way. I knew now that the world was alive, that there was a teeming energy underlying all sense impressions that was accessible to all, in all times and places. as long as that meant right now. This understanding has been with me ever since, although I sometimes forget it when wrapped up in worldly stresses. Unfortunately, I was not able to access any more mushrooms in the next year. Still, some breakthroughs into consciousness were experienced, many of them related to the use of cannabis. During law school, my cannabis use was kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, I, along with my friends, abused it pretty badly, using it several times a day, which greatly hindered my ability to study and understand law, which I had little or no interest in anyway. The cannabis also contributed to a general paranoia that polarized me, at least from all the squares and idiots in the mainstream law school environment. Squares and idiots in quotes. Especially, this alienation was okay with me, however, because there were many other abuses in the mainstream community that I was beginning to make a separation from. Most particularly, my alcohol abuse declined. This is not to say that it was not there. Any of my law school friends reading this may be shocked at that statement, but it's true, because my college use had been so very high that even moderate abuse could be pointing to a decline in use. I was still drinking a lot, but I was now stopping at being drunk instead of proceeding to the annihilation stage. I was drinking much less hard alcohol and sticking with beer. At the end of the night of partying, I would reach for the water and the water pipe, which I had become proficient at using, instead of the bottle, making me less rowdy and more introspective. Cannabis gradually came to dominate my nights, with alcohol and sometimes even meeting women being an afterthought that I participated only only because others did. The most clear images and memories of this period were the evening hours before we went to the bars and parties, and after we got back, when we passed a water pipe around and we sipped rather than slammed beer. Our general activities during these times consisted of watching sports on TV with no volume and listening to music. We would all be swept up in our thoughts, and we did little talking. It was kept grounded by vigorous running and basketball daily, at least for me. My mind would oscillate from the surreal fantasy world of that I witnessed enacted in slow motion during television commercials, to the nature of life, to the nature of mind, to the meaning of our eco-socio-political situation and my place in it. I also learned, intuited, imaged, understood, and reasoned that the way a human comes to the answers to these questions was through meditation, not through thinking about it, but by not thinking, by stilling the thought process. I remember making these breakthroughs during my third year of law school, during which I began to traverse the way that had been opened the previous summer. The summer of 1991 can be definitely seen as a fulcrum that facilitated change in my life. That summer, I got a job working for the public defender's office in the same town where I attended undergrad college. My girlfriend at the time was living there, and several of my male college friends had stayed there in order to attend medical school. I was gradually, though almost imperceptibly, moving away from these men. Working at the public defender was a litmus test for my budding law career. If I couldn't cut it there, in terms of alienation and competence, I probably couldn't make it anywhere. It was the closest thing to a legal career that I could believe in. I found that I could do the work, but didn't see why I should. Many of the lawyers there were overworked and stressed, ulcers waiting to happen. It was also frustrating because we often lost, and our power paled in comparison to that of the DA and the judge. These findings, however, paled in comparison to two other findings I made in July 1991. The first event involved cannabis, and the second involved alcohol. The first event involved alcohol too, as a backdrop. In early July 1991, several of my friends from high school made the 75-minute drive to visit party with me for the weekend. On Friday night, we went out drinking to a bar, then to an after party. Two of my friends, in fact, passed out on the lawn of the party house and spent the night there. They woke up early and came back to my house, where the rest of my friends and I were still crashed out. They woke us up, and some of us had the infectious condition that was known as a happy hangover, basically meaning you woke up drunk. After joking around briefly about the last night's escapades, we all decided to do what we called the wake and bake, getting high first thing in the morning after a night of drinking. One of my guests that weekend had a good deal of homegrown pot that his brother gave him, the same person who first sold me on taking mushrooms years before. This person grew what we called tripweed. 1 or 2 hits would carry a heavy psychedelic effect. So, at about 10 in the morning, I smoked in my own apartment with 5 of my best friends with whom I was comfortable and safe. We listened to music from my own collection. I was in about the most comfortable environment that I could imagine, but that morning I suffered the most severe mental breakdown of my life. Again, my short-term memory deserted me. I was able to observe things, but I was unable to assign any meaning to these things. I felt an absurdly fast stream of thoughts and feelings going through my head, but I had no control and couldn't really make sense of any of them. The music that we listened to affected me emotionally, but it sounded like cacophony. I was seemingly unable to attach any meaning to it, as I could not attach any words to them. I felt the world closing in around me, and I again resorted to the fetal position in an instructive strategy of sensory withdrawal, but this time I remained there for at least an hour. My friends were having a good time, and they did not sense the kind of meltdown I was going through. For about 90 minutes, I remained in the same condition, in the same room as the others, but not participating with them. Then they all put me on the spot when they, as visitors from out of town, asked me, "Who should we call to order pizza?" When my friend asked me this simple question, I was unable to process the words. I saw him talking and heard him speaking, but while he did so, I remember feeling, I have no idea what he's saying. What am I possibly going to respond? Literally, at the same time that I was panicking in this way, I heard myself, indeed saw myself, responding. You could call X pizza at X number, but it's probably not open yet, or you could call Y pizza at Y number. Whatever I said, it satisfied my friends. They didn't even realize that anything was wrong with me, and they ordered pizza successfully based on my directions. I was amazed that I was able to respond to a question that I did not consciously understand, using a language I could not consciously formulate. I felt as if my body was working even though I was not occupying it at the time. This type of autopilot response was a big breakthrough for me because it showed me the power of my unconscious and showed me that I could let go of my total reliance upon syllogistic thoughts and reason. My body had a lot of untapped potential and programmability, and I now became less afraid of tapping into it. I was not even in my own body, but my best friends did not even notice. In the next years, I began to take my chances, going into public places, graduate school classes, even job interviews, even though my conscious mind was somewhere else, and trusting my instincts and feelings to get me through the day-to-day logistics. For the rest of that summer, I was smoking the tripweed, and I began to seriously investigate the use of psychedelics to unlock my potential, even though I was constantly fighting the voices of my conscience. and various authority figures telling me they were bad for me. They distorted reality. They destroyed motivation, and they gave me a fried egg brain. My ability to debunk this rhetoric in my head greatly helped me to debunk many other taken for granted ideas about American society and culture. This process was greatly accelerated by my experiences with the law. At the public defender's office, I saw clearly that the justice system was lacking, but it did not really hit home until the justice system stopped working for me. In early July, I visited my parents' suburb and attended a music festival with some different friends in the city. Without pot, the order of the day was drinking, and it was very hot. We all came equipped with our own alcohol supply to smuggle into the festival so that we didn't have to pay the outrageous beer prices inside. Everything was going very well until we attempted to make a rendezvous with some friends under one of the music tents. The tent was wall to wall with people, making it stiflingly hot and very difficult to maneuver. Most people were drunk, including me, which didn't help matters. After about half an hour of sweaty searching in vain for our friends, we were ready to give up, only we were now so far from the entrance that it may have taken another half an hour to get out. Being hot and impatient, I had the brilliant idea that I could approach a nearby security guard who was patrolling a backstage area, tell him our problem, and see if he would let us hop the short fence to get out of the tent. I did this very politely and tried to explain the situation. He said no, and I came back disappointed. After discussing the matter more with my friends, it was decided, probably by me, that I approach him again and emphasizing the emergency of the situation. This naive strategy backfired when, upon my desperate but still polite approach, the security guard grabbed me and forcibly threw me to the ground. At this point, my temper, which was never very far removed, snapped, and I sprang to my feet and got into the guard's face with my loudest voice, screaming at him what it was that all about. "You can't do that to me. I've got rights." This was, of course, untrue, as I was shortly taken and carried away by two uniformed officers while I kicked and screamed about my alleged rights. I was handcuffed and taken straight to the city jail, where I witnessed a set of atrocities that finally initiated me into the inside of the race and justice system in America. After being booked by some overtly hostile police for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest, I was placed in the bullpen, a holding cell where you were taken until you were processed into your own individual cell or bailed out. This, I found, was a travesty, as I heard from a few people who had been in the bullpen for 3 weeks. There are about 50 people in an approximately 300 to 400 square foot room with one toilet overflowed with no walls, which explained the half-inch high layer of standing urine on the floor. Adding to this nightmare was the fact that the black population in the cell, the vast majority, was also hostile to me because of my light skin and suburban mannerisms. The alpha male among the blacks spent a little time ruthlessly humiliating me, which I arguably deserved, until I countered him by informing the onlookers that I work for the public defender's office and that I may have some legal advice for people. I ended up giving legal advice to several individuals over the next hours. I also witnessed violent threats and racial epithets coming openly from the mouths of police officers on their once-per-hour trip to the bullpen. Their hostility was undisguised, which showed me how naive I was. Also, during my nearly 24 hours there, I was given 3 meals like I was supposed to. All, however, were comprised of plain bologna on white with black coffee. Fortunately or not, at this time, I had not yet become a vegetarian or gave up caffeine or white flour. The next day, about noon, I was able to reach my parents and they bailed me out. While my parents were far from pleased, I could sense that they understood that a lot of the situation was due to my race. they could tell that I finally learned some lessons about race that they had gone to great lengths to protect me from while I was growing up. I now knew the reality about what the relationship was between inner city or Southern police and African Americans. They knew these lessons firsthand, and now I did too. I was not going to get justice because the police and the justice systems were inherently unjust. It would be the exception rather than the rule that I would be treated fairly. Indeed, it was part of the policeman's job to keep order, to treat non-whites with injustice. In fact, this was not only true of the police, but really any American vying for status in the mainstream world. This is a lesson that I have not forgotten since then. It is not that powerful people and authorities were personally opposed to me. Rather, it was that the market forces of the system were naturally slanted, such that unconscious oppression was the norm. And we're going to stop right there, but this occurred in 1991. It's amazing, 33 years later, and it's kind of almost the opposite now. You know, where they just bail you out of jail in, you know, no bail, jail, and, you know, so we'll talk about that some more. But thanks for tuning in today, and have a great